much. We're very excited to host our first nutrition and wellness event. My name's Katie Terry. I'm the general manager of Parkhurst Dining here at Bard College. We do have some lovely panelists here with us today. We're going to introduce ourselves briefly.
I'm Samantha Robbins, Director for Sports Performance, Head Athletic Trainer here at Bard.
I'm Juliet Wolff. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice in Redmond, New York, and happy to be here, engaged with the Bard community.
Hi, I'm Alicia Koloski. I am the Dietitian for Parkhurst Dining for all of our college accounts and corporate accounts, and I'm based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Ilyse Simon, and I am the Bard Dietitian here on campus.
Thank you all for joining. There's been a lot of discussion around wellness as well as nutrition and what it means to all of us. I think it means something different to all of us and what our end goal is. So maybe just very briefly describing what nutrition and how that directly relates to your wellness means to you.
Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to say more of what it means to me in my job, so to speak, less to me in general. I think the way that I approach health and wellness or nutrition for our athletes is, fueling them to perform at their best at all times. And I think that's what my goal is when I have an athlete approaching me asking about nutrition advice. Is usually how can they get there, and that's how I go about it right now.
Okay, well, from my perspective, it's very different because I'm working with students who have come to me for help with various issues, depression, anxiety, perhaps an eating disorder, but even people who are coming with some mild concerns often have perhaps body image concerns, have a history of, some disordered eating. Not everybody learns how to pay attention to their own signals and signs of when they are hungry, when they are full, and don't have a lot of information about proper nutrition. So for me, it's really about mental health and how to feed yourself, how to be nourished in a way that optimizes how you feel and how you function.
All right, well, I could talk on this for a really long time. This is something that I'm very passionate about, just the fact that nutrition is very nuanced. There is no one definition of nutrition. Obviously, nutrition is getting food to our bodies for our bodies to function, but within that scope, there's just so much nuance. I always like to say, too, if we want to talk about nutrition, we have to talk about social justice, we have to talk about politics. There are so many things at play that when we think it's just about us and what we're eating, there are so many external factors that impact our viewpoint on our bodies, on nutrition. So saying that, nutrition is a very complex thing to me that's not easy to sell. And that's another thing too is that, so much of what we're getting, what we think is nutrition education is actually nutrition marketing. So there's a lot of education around that. So to me, it's not necessarily kind of like defining what nutrition is, but kind of talking about all the aspects that nutrition encompasses. So I once did a talk on, they wanted me to do one just on general food and you, so kind of like nutrition and you. And as I dug into so many different points, there was 25 slides that just had the food industry, politics, the healthcare system is pretty bad too. So there's to me, nutrition, when we talk about nutrition, one of the big things I just like to talk about is education. Just that giving people the information, all the information they need to make the best choices for themselves. So it's kind of my short answer on that.
That's great. And I love how varied and nuanced each of our answers are. And I'd say, for me, in my perspective, that nutrition and health and wellness is all about self-care. That's what I want to help my students with. How do we feed ourselves so that we feel good? And to remember that it has nothing to do with whatever we read in a magazine or see on the internet, and it has nothing to do with the people next to us, what they're eating. It's all about what we're eating. And so many times we have information that goes up here, and well, this is really, this is high on this, and this is good for this, and this is good for this, but when I eat it, I don't feel well. So that's not good for us. It's how does it feel in you? No one can publicize a diet that is good for everyone because we all have such different needs and different bodies. And how do we attain that freedom and confidence that, okay, I'm going to figure this out, and it's not going to be perfect, and it's going to be trial and error. And when I eat this is how I feel, without judgment. So I help students. I'm an eating disorder specialist in my private practice. I do a lot of that on campus. I also work with a lot of international students here who come, they don't know what the food is, or people who just come from their home environments. They're like, well, this is not how I eat, and how do we give allowance to say, okay, well, let's try, let's see what works. Let's deal with the anxiety of going into Klein, or how do we get snacks for your room, or how do we do self-care for you, regardless of what anyone else tells you, so that you feel good after you eat.
Yes, I think it is very important to remember it is such a broad topic, and like you stated, it's not one simple plan works for all. So maybe if somebody's coming to you to improve their nutrition, maybe what are some more specific questions to that individual to kind of help narrow down what their end goal may be?
I think we probably do this every day. And it's about what their end goal is. I often ask, well, what are the behaviors now that you're doing that aren't working for you? And then what are the behaviors that you're doing that are working for you? I mean, there are easy things. You know, if I was going to give a 2-minute nutrition talk, it would say, do you eat 3 times a day? A meal equals a protein, carb, and a fat. Are there colorful things on your plate? You know, so we look for color. Are there vegetables twice a day? Do you snack on fruits? Like, how do we get the overall food that you're eating that makes you feel vibrant and alive and not like, oh, right? We want to see how do you feel after.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is one thing is whenever it comes to me, at first I make sure that they are consistently eating satisfying foods. But then I always talk about the best things you can do for your diet is, well, eat enough, but then also eat variety. Just like, are you eating a variety of different foods so you're not just eating one specific food group or something like that, or are they eliminating one? So eating variety. And then I talk about, we're big in Parkhurst too, is just kind of plant-forward eating. So that's something that I do talk about because just I know from the environmental impact and then also for our bodies, making sure they're getting enough fiber and eating enough kind of foods, which is just another way of saying fruits, veggies, that type of thing, the grains. So those are the 2 things that I kind of focus on is variety and then making sure they're getting enough fiber. Those are the 2 probably where I start for just general. But I do, and I'm sure Ilyse does this too, like I listen for cues for disordered eating from the get-go when people start talking because so much of our eating has, like disordered eating has become normalized and it's being congratulated and things like that. So I try to listen for signs of some disordered eating. That way I know which, how to better talk about nourishing the bodies.
I think the first thing that I ask most athletes is how much water are you drinking? And that's hydration is huge. And then we talk about protein. And most of the time, every athlete is lacking in protein. So that's kind of the first things we look at is making sure that you're getting enough protein for your body weight. And same thing with water is making sure that you're getting in enough water throughout the day, plus what you're sweating out.
I talk to students about not only what they're eating and how they're eating, but what goes on for them. What are the emotions that they have when they're eating? Do they feel comfortable eating? Do they feel comfortable eating in a group? How do they feel about themselves? Do they have a sense of what their body is supposed to look like? And they're basing their food on that. And again, exploring sort of what are their past associations, what kind of things are realistic, what kind of things are not realistic, very much assumptions in society, disordered eating has become very normalized. So helping people, again, diets, who fat phobia, don't like their bodies, or who, have an idea of what eating is supposed to look like. So really exploring some of those issues with folks.
Yeah, and I think, just the eating for all of us all obviously is very different for us all, depending on who we are, what we do. So yes, I do definitely think it's a little different and unique. Moving on to those more specific questions, if there's any particular one type of, I don't want to say diet to follow, but more so, I feel like carbs, right? I feel like they've kind of gotten a bad name over the past few years, but I feel like they're just as important as your protein sometimes. And again, kind of maybe a little bit more
You have athletes that walk in the athletic training room and they're like, well, I'm on a low carb diet. And I'm like, why? Why is that a thing that you're doing? And it's just a lot of myth busting, and explaining to them that carbohydrates are extremely important for them to perform well. And I think that's probably the most answered question, or the most myth that I've busted or talked about, is that you need your carbs, right? The only type of athletes that could get away with a ketogenic or a low carb diet is an endurance-based athlete, right? Because they don't need those carbs for the ATP and the power. So just discussing those options, what type of carb is good to have before practice, after practice, coincided with your protein. But yeah, carbs are a buzzword in that room, but making sure that they are getting the adequate amount of carbohydrates. And I think carbohydrates are constantly, being portrayed as bad, right? And but sometimes an athlete's going to need a bag of fruit snacks right before they play. They need it. It has to happen. Or at halftime, or midway through a race, you're putting down some glue just to get that sugar in. That's my take.
I guess for me, we generally have a different population, I guess, but for me, it's often, are you eating enough? People who maybe, they wake up late for class, they don't have time, they have a cup of coffee, maybe they're sitting down to their first meal at 3 o'clock, and, they feel like, oh, I can't eat a lot now, it's almost dinner, and, I feel like there are folks who are just kind of barely feeding themselves, and then, maybe they'll eat a lot at night, and what's available at night, not generally a full meal. So I do talk about, 3 meals a day, 2 snacks. We're like, what? That's so much food. And it's like, no, actually, you're allowed to feed yourself. And if you're eating, 3 meals and 2 snacks, you're not going to eat a massive amount. So yeah, I think for me, it's often just like, are you eating, and are you eating enough?
Yeah, so for me, as I work with college students, but then I also work at our corporate account, so I get a lot of, people in their 40s and 50s, and they eat carbohydrates as well. I always say too, when I talk, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, where fat was a bad word. To this day, even though I have, masters in nutrition, know this through and through, I still have a hard time with fats. So when I see a number or something, oh, that's a lot, and I'm but then my second thought is, no, it's not. So that's normal. I was scarred actually. I think this is why I'm a dietitian, is because I had a dietitian come into my middle school and do a visual with fat, we do sugar with soda. She did it with fat, so I learned what I know now is Crisco. She showed us. But anyway, this is why we need to be careful when we do nutrition with children too, nutrition education with children. But anyway, so I always say too, when I'm talking fat was horrible in the 80s and 90s. Carbohydrates are terrible now in the 2000s. Protein, better watch its back, because we're coming for you. So yeah, so when I educate, a lot of it is myth busting. Any type of, when I'm doing nutrition education with athletes or with just general, I always talk about carbohydrates, what they do, and then protein, what its job is, and then fat, what its job is, just to give a good visual of, there is no one nutrient that is more important than the other for the general population. So just really kind of emphasizing that every one of those nutrients has a very important and specific thing to do in our bodies, and explain, like, if you're not eating carbohydrate, here's what happens, which is great because it's going to keep you from not dying right away, but long term, you know, it has some consequences to it and things like that. So it's a lot of just education, just kind of showing a little bit of the importance of them. I'm big on traditional diets too, and traditional cultural diets, so it's really cool when you look back at different cultures throughout the world. It's amazing how humans have taken, you know, every culture, not every culture, I should say. It depends on the area that you live in. You know, like the Eskimos, they definitely have, Inuit people have a very specific, just because they're limited resources. But in general, that there's carbohydrates, proteins, and fats kind of just naturally in a lot of the cultural cuisine. So to me, that kind of just shows a little bit of what the human body is, what it needs. So, but I always go back to food. I love food and culinary. So that kind of just shows it for me. But yeah, so it's a lot of just kind of showing the importance that, you know, our bodies, I also like to say our bodies are machines and things like that. It doesn't work like if you miss something within a 24-hour period, or, you know, I tend to just say look at things over, you know, over the, you know, a week period, a month period, that type of thing. So.
It's not that I hear. It's great. And as far as if I have students or people come to me and say, I'm not eating carbs, I say, oh, are you diabetic? You know, they're like, no. Why? Like, well, then why are you eating carbohydrates? Which then leads to that question about, what are the food rules that you have in your head? You're clearly following some food rules. There are good and there are bad. And let's talk about how these good and bad, black and white kind of columns got set up in your brain. What did you read? Who told you something that you believed? And there is no good or bad food. I have three bad foods on my list, and none of them are foods if we look at a definition of food. Trans fat, soda, and I forget the last one because it's like I don't even think about it in that way of good and bad. And it's right, we come back to, where did I get this thought that this was bad for me, and what does that mean, and how do I eliminate that? And it's okay in moderation to eat whatever I want to eat. And so a lot of the work I do is finding that middle colorful space between the black and the white. And I think I was thinking about the traditional diets that you were talking about, and I had so many people say, well, you know, man, I can't eat bread 3 times a day. And people look back at all these cultures, you know. We're eating rice 3 times a day, or we're eating some kind of grain 3 times a day. And also we're eating fermented foods, which, right, that's what all of these indigenous cultures are eating, these fermented things, which our United States culture doesn't really have so much of.
We charge a lot.
Or what?
Or we charge a lot.
I
I'm in a
know.
health food store, we charge a lot.
Oh my gosh, all that kombucha thing.
Yeah.
Intro, how, as a consumer, how do we kind of differentiate between the nutrition marketing versus the nutrition education? Because there is a lot out there, right? And a lot of, unfortunately, false information.
Right, I don't care what the package says. And I teach people, if we have to talk about it, how to read a food label. And you don't. Yeah, I don't find it helpful at all to look at the nutrition facts on a label, because it's not telling me much. But I do want to look at the ingredients. I want to see, what is exactly that I'm eating? Do I know what these things are? And if I can see oats, sugar, cinnamon, oh, it's probably oil, it's probably a granola bar, I know what that is. But if it's 400 things I don't know what they are, I don't know what it is. The actual ingredients will tell me, is this a carb? Is this a protein? Is this a fat? What is it? I gotta know what it is. And yeah,
Yeah, so I will say I hate nutrition labels as well, but they can be, I tend to talk at them as use them for information so that you know, which is really hard to do, especially if you've been scarred. I hate numbers and food and things like that. But if you're going to read a nutrition label and be like, okay, this had this many calories in it, I ate this for a snack, and then it had this many grams of protein in it or whatever, I ate this for a snack, I was hungry 20 minutes later. So use that as information, not that, you know, that you can only eat this thing because it has this many calories in it or whatever. Use it more of, okay, this is how, when I eat this much of these numbers, how I felt, that type of thing. So if you're going to use information information, the food label that way. Yeah, there's, my first thing for all this stuff is question everything. I mean, it's really sad, but you kind of have to. You know, there's so much information on like, if you start looking at the packaging of like health foods or nutrition foods, it's always green or like a very neutral color, browns. It's matted, it's not shiny. That's how you know if it's a nutritious potato chip versus an unhealthy one, is if the bag is shiny or matted. That's how you know. And they usually can charge you a little bit extra as well. That was sarcasm. There was sarcasm. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. You know, the potato chips are pretty similar. And potato chips are fun. So there's just so much marketing that we're just not aware of that they're doing. They're studying us, and that's why I do get behind intuitive eating and things like that. But I also tell people, be aware, like, they are scientifically making foods to make you want to keep eating. Like, they know our biology, they know what we're doing. So don't feel like you're failing as a human or an eater or anything like that, because there's so many forces beyond your control that that you're unaware of that are affecting you. So it's hard because there is marketing, there's money involved. The wellness industry is like an over $70 billion industry. There's some, if you guys are into podcasts, I have recommendations. There's a great one called Weight Maintenance. The maintenance phase, sorry. It's great. They do one just even on, this is nothing new that's going around too. Like the whole snake oil, you've heard that, salesmen, things like that. The history behind where that came from. So it's really interesting when you look back at history for, this, again, this is nothing new. They just, we've just taken it to another extreme and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of just, understanding. You don't have to know everything, but just know that you're not a failure for this crazy, insane food industry and healthcare and the research, and there's so many different variables at play. So it's kind of a whatever.
Yeah, I remember watching the movie The Fed Up. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. And my mind was just blown about that. And so I think for my personal health, when I started looking at nutrition labels, and I'm like, well, let's cut a lot of carbs. I'm not going to do any. I already lifted today. Maybe I don't want to eat that. And it's all there. You're all thinking about it. And but I think when I'm looking for my athletes, like right now, I'm trying to do a fueling station for our athletes around practice times. So I do have to look at the nutrition labels and say, okay, if this bar only has 2 grams of carbs, it's not going to be a great pre-practice bar. Or if it's really high in fat, same thing. I'm not going to, advertise this is a good, quick fueling for you. No, I'm going to be looking for the ones that are a little bit higher in carbohydrates, that are more sustained carbohydrates. And so it's just a little bit different now how I approach it for my athletes versus how I approach it myself now. And I guess even as with our children, I have a 4-year-old that, every once in a while she'll be like, well, why can't I have that piece of candy? And your first instinct is, well, it's bad for you, right? But we don't want to say that, because then she's going to be like, oh, everything, food is bad. And so there's just certain things of like how we describe it to her. Your protein's going to help you build your muscle, and the carbohydrates are going to give you energy. The fruits and vegetables are going to keep you healthy. So just not having like a good bad thing with, with our athletes, and even just, younger children as well.
And then I guess lastly, really trying to use your nutrition to make you feel the best for your wellness. Especially for me, just kind of, I've been traveling on the road for work Monday to Friday and then going home. Kind of reverse for me. I feel like I'm eating a lot cleaner when I'm on the road and when I go home. My husband is a huge sweets addict, so unfortunately I go down the tube with him on that. But I really noticed over this past year how kind of negatively all that sugar really affected me every Monday and Tuesday at the beginning of the work week. So something that I've consistently kind of gotten into over the past year is just food journaling, just to see how food directly does affect me. Is there any other kind of daily routines or suggestions that you may give someone that is looking to have their nutrition, and they, again, whatever wellness they're striving for, but to kind of get in the routine of doing to further this.
I definitely think the food journal is great, and I encourage students to do that. And I think the other thing is just sort of mindfulness about it. Because I think we have to, I think we're often eating with all these assumptions that we've talked about, and what's good and what's bad, and I hate my body and all of that. So I think just to really notice what you're eating, how's it tasting in your mouth. One thing that we haven't really talked about is food is very pleasurable, ideally, right? I mean, food is pleasure, it's nurturance, it's social, in the ideal form, right? That's how it feels. And so, are we enjoying our food? Is this a pleasant experience? And definitely, as Ilyse was saying, how do I feel afterwards? I ate mindfully, and then how does my body feel the rest of the day? I mean, I think I noticed this myself a long time ago that, oh yeah, sure, it's fun to eat all these pastries. I love them when they're delicious, but then I have a headache. So I noticed that I'm very sensitive to a lot of sugar at once. So I try not to do that because it gives me a headache. Not that pastries are bad, but I don't feel better. So, I encourage people to really consider how it's feeling in their bodies and how the whole experience is for them. So it's a pleasure.
Okay, Okay, I love that answer, and I think that is something that I like being a dietitian that works in food service too, is that we like food. We view food as experience, as connection, that type of thing. So our Well On Your Way program is designed for that holistic view of physical, mental, and social. That's included in our kind of nutrition program. Because, you can eat, quote unquote, the healthiest, cleanest, whatever diet, exercise, but if your mental health is out of whack or you don't have social connection, your health is going to suffer. I'm very interested in the mind-gut connection, talking about the vagus nerve and that effect on our absorption and things like that is fascinating. There will be more and more studies on that. So much of our, these kind of bowel diseases that are coming out, they basically created a disease called IBS, where they're just we don't really know what the cause of it is. So do some mindfulness, do some meditation, see if that helps. So I think that this, I think we're going to start to get into a little bit more of that. But for me, I think I agree with what Ilyse said very early on, that nutrition, I think was the first question, nutrition is about self-care. So it really is taking care of yourself. I love just the whole, we talked about this, how does it make you feel? I was educated in the time frame of, a lot of dieting, a lot of, again, towards the end of the low fat, so food did not taste good. So it's, I come from a long line of dieters, women in larger bodies, that it's taking me decades of time to really weed that out. So it's easier for some people than others too. So I think that's the other thing too, is when you talk to people about nutrition, it's not just simple. It's not just just eat to take care of yourself. How do you feel? There's so much mental stuff too that, that years and years of what we're fed and taught and that we internalize are really there. So anyway, so for me, it's really it really looks like self-care, and you kind of have to have the privilege to have the opportunities to kind of check in with yourself and do stuff like that. So I think that it really, it's like I said, it's kind of a privilege to be able to use food as self-care to the extent that, is really beneficial for our bodies and our minds and things like that. But so I just really, I think that's all I have to say about it. So I'm kind of off the whole.
I think to touch on the food journaling thing, and I think food journaling is a tool, and it's one of many tools that we can use. I had a client this week, I asked her to food journal, and it was not the right tool because it totally was overwhelming, and she couldn't believe, she was shocked and mortified and full of shame about what she was eating. So completely shut her down. It's like, okay, let's not do that tool. There are so many tools we can use. I think one of the tools that let's talk about religion for a second. I like to talk about spirituality. It's huge. You know, this food is spiritual. It's a spiritual experience. And if we look at religion for a minute, most all religions have something we do before we eat. There's a prayer. There's, my kid in Waldorf school lit a candle. Like, everybody's doing something to kind of center ourselves and ground ourselves before we eat. What happens when we do that? We take a breath. What happens on the inside is that now we're able to produce enzymes to digest the food that we're about to eat, because when we're stressed, we're not really making any digestive enzymes because we're running away from the tiger that's chasing us. Right? So, wow, there's something in that spiritual religious aspect of taking a moment and taking a pause. And so that's a tool I love to use. Let's take a pause before we eat. Do whatever you need to do to either connect to the food, connect to yourself, find out if you're hungry. Oh, find out if you're hungry. I love that because there's another tool I love. And I call it the apple or the carrot test. And so it's a handy test. Am I hungry? I don't know. Well, would you eat a carrot? Like, we pick a food that's not very exciting. I can't say apple because those are really good apples. So, would I eat a carrot? And I don't have to eat the carrot. This is a mental exercise. Would I eat the carrot? Yeah, I'd eat whatever someone put in front of me because I'm hungry. Or we might say, would I eat a carrot? No, I don't want a carrot. I kind of want, DTR's early riser, or I want a burger and fries. Okay, that's not hunger. That's something else. Let me get to ask, okay, if I won't eat this in my head, but I certainly want that. It's not hunger, so what is it? Right? It's another tool that kind of brings us back to what's going on. And now I can go back to pausing and say, what is going on? Am I tired, hungry, or tired, thirsty, bored? Like, what is it? So we have to, again, check in with ourselves all the time, back to ourselves, not just up here, but in here, and figure out what the right tool is.
It's funny because a lot of times at 8 o'clock in the morning, my athletes will come in and say, well, I didn't eat anything. And I'm really like, okay, you gotta eat this or you're not making it to practice. So we're definitely a very diverse group here. We're gonna see different type of people, different type of athletes. And it does come down to what makes you feel good, especially as an athlete. Like, you're not gonna eat a cheeseburger before you go play a basketball game or a soccer game. So it's kind of just getting used to what makes you feel good, and again, realizing, well, I had this chicken quesadilla before practice, and I don't feel good. Okay, we're not going to do that again. What I also tell coaches or athletes when they're on the road is don't eat something before a game that you've never eaten, because you don't know how your body's going to respond to it. So just finding what works for you. Some athletes will swear by, I am not going to eat anything before a 2-hour 8 a.m. practice. Well, half hour through, they're like, I don't feel so good. And I'm like, okay, well, now we got to eat something. Not eating is not something that works for an athlete. You have to eat. You have to be fueled. And I think it's different. A lot of athletes will view food as a performance tool, right? And I think a lot of athletes will come into me and say, well, should I have creatine? Should I have protein? Should I take this supplement? Should I do here? And we just bring it back to, are you getting all the food groups in and things along those lines? But as far as like my role with food and athletes, it's more of just education and what feels good for you. Some athletes might not like a whey protein because they're lactose intolerant, or they don't like how it feels. So, all right, let's try a different one. So it's just about what makes you feel good, what makes you perform the best, and it's actually easier for us to define what makes you feel good is did you perform well in practice? Did you perform well in a game? Did you have energy? Were you sore afterwards? And then they can be more aware of it.
Thank you for that. I think we all kind of cater to a very diverse group of people that we find out. I feel like the main common motif around this was, self-educate, self-care, what works best, for you and makes you feel the best. Just a lot of remembering that it's not just one fits all for everybody. It's not one cookie better for all, and just really working what works best for yourself and the individual. Thank you all for your time. Do we have any questions at this moment?
I wanted to ask that you guys mentioned about like specific carbs we eat before practice and after practice, and I wanted to know like what specific carbs should I eat before practice and what carbs I should eat after practice.
Answer that me.
You go first.
Yeah, so for me, when it comes to before practice, after practice, just carbohydrates are going to be important. You want to stay away from like the really high fiber ones because they're a little bit more complex to break down and things like that. So you're going to look for a little bit more simple starch, like, you know, for your snacks, you kind of just want a little bit more easy digestible carbs. So, you know, you can still get whole grains in there, you know, like if you're looking for that, but you really just like regular pasta or, you know, granola bars, oats, you know, cereal, that type of thing. You're really just making sure that you want to get some type of any type of carbohydrate in there. And then, you know, when we talk about after, you still need carbohydrate. You have to, you know, restore your glycogen restores and things like that. So you still want some of those. But then just general, you know, if you're not going to, in the evening time or, you know, your dinner, that's when you want to try to get a little bit more of the complex, you know, like your whole grains and things like that, beans, lentils, those type of things will be a little bit more of the complex carbohydrates, just because they'll help, you know, stabilize your blood sugar through the night and things like that. But really it's just making sure you're getting an adequate amount of carbohydrates before, and again, just kind of watching, you just don't want it to be too high fiber.
Thank you.
And it also depends on when you're eating, right? So if it's a half hour before, maybe I'm going to snack on something real quick, like a That's It bar, or, you know, something that's going to give you a quick jolt of sugar to get you through that point, right? But if it's an hour and a half to 2 hours before, you might have maybe a bagel or something along those lines, right? And so it's just, you know, making sure that you have enough to get through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.